So welcome everyone. My name is Hannah Curtis. I'm Assistant Director with the North Metro Small Business Development Center. And we're so glad you've joined us for our webinar today. This is a special session that is sponsored by our partners at the Brighton Economic Development Corporation. So we want to give a big thank you to them. And I'll put some information in the chat about with their website. You can check out the resources they have available there. They have a lot to support small businesses if you're in Brighton specifically. And I know we have some people from all over the state. So if you're not in Brighton, we do encourage you to connect with your local economic development department as well. And if you need help finding who that is, we can help connect you. So a few housekeeping items. We are recording this session, so you will have access to all of the material as well as the slides that are shared today afterwards. So I know Courtney has prepared a lot of wonderful content for us. That's going to have to move pretty quickly, but you will be able to refer back to that. And of course, we always encourage you to schedule one-on-one appointments if that's something you want to follow up on any of this content with afterwards. The SBDC offers free consulting appointments. Most of those are happening remotely, and we just want to support you in the ways that we can. So if you need more information about how to set those up, I'll put some of that in the chat, and you can always reach out to us, and you can always schedule directly through our website as well. So we hope that is user-friendly for you. Feel free to ask questions using the chat, or if there's a pause and you want to just come off mute, whatever we want this to be as interactive as possible, and we want to answer your questions. So feel free to do that. I think those are most of the things off the bat that we need to cover. So I do want to introduce Courtney Berg. She's one of our HR consultants and works with a couple other SBDCs as well. She's owner of Courtside Consulting and just such a wealth of knowledge. So we're so happy to have her with us today. She's put together a fun little football theme to kind of get us through some of this HR content. So Courtney, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Anytime I can wear a Broncos sweatshirt and speak at the same time, it's got to be a good thing, right? So I'm all decked out in my Bronco gear and ready to talk football. No, that's not what we're going to talk. Even though I've got my sideline headset on, so that's going right. What we're going to be talking about is HR, and this is really the blocking and tackling of HR. It's the basics. It's the things that honestly. Are really, really important to know, but many business owners kind of skip over or may not pay attention to, or may, oh yeah, I know about that, but kind of conversation. Now, I can't cover all the important areas in HR. There's no way that I'm going to be able to do that in the time that we have allowed this today. And also, I can't cover these things in a lot of detail, but I am going to give you important points to know. And my hope is that you'll be able to say, ooh, there's something I need to remember about that, and maybe look it up, or certainly make a counseling appointment with somebody at the SBDC to walk through it to get further information if you need. So you're going to have more information at the end of the hour, and that's what we want to do. So what are we going to do? We're going to talk about the playbook. And what do I mean by the playbook? The playbook is going to be the employment laws and your employee handbook. And we're going to go through very important employment laws, as well as some things that you need to put in your employee handbook. Draft day, well, that to me just screamed talent acquisition, right? How do we recruit people? What do we do with them after we recruit? Those types of things. We're going to be talking about that. Salary caps, although we probably have salary caps at small businesses, this is an entire compensation discussion, so we'll be talking about that. And then injured reserve is going to be leave management and workers' compensation. This got added because I've had a couple of people reach out to me about some questions about the leaves, and so I wanted to make sure that I included some information there. And then game plan, just performance management, just some basic performance management, blocking and tackling. So as Hannah said, please stop me if you have questions. Hannah's going to help me out by watching the chat. And then I have to do my disclaimer. And my disclaimer is I'm not an attorney. I don't play one on TV. I'm not an attorney. And so what I'm bringing you is really a lot of HR operational knowledge, and we're going to be talking about the laws as it pertains to that. Just a little bit about my background. I grew up in Greeley, so I'm a Colorado native. I've been a Bronco fan all my life. And even this year, just to let everybody know, even this year, what I did was I grew up in retail furniture. So my grandfather started a furniture store out of a gas station, and I grew up in a retail furniture company, entrepreneurship family. Everybody was excited about that. Right before I graduated from college with my business administration degree with an emphasis in management, my mom sold the furniture store. So I ended up working for a national insurance company, and then ultimately through a series of events ended up as an HR director at an ambulance service here in the Denver area. And so my entire career has been operations and HR, from a frontline supervisor all the way up to the C-suite in both. And I opened Courtside 15 years ago. Can you believe that, Hannah? 15 years ago, just last month. So very excited to be speaking to you today, just to give you a little bit about my background. Let's talk about the playbook. And you know, the not following the laws and not following your handbook rules actually can get you a yellow flag on the field, can get you a penalty, right? Following some of your policies in your handbook, but not all of them, is another way that you can get a penalty, or sometimes following them and sometimes not, just being inconsistent. So what does that penalty look like? What is it? A fine? Is it what does that look like? It really depends on what the situation is. But let me walk you through some of the most important laws that you as a small business owner need to know about. And those laws have to do with discrimination and harassment, compensation and overtime, the safety rules, safety laws. What do you as a small business owner have to follow? Protected leaves, and then workers' comp. So again, we're going to cover these just briefly. And if you look at this slide, it has the federal laws and it has a state law there. Excuse me, these all have to do with discrimination and harassment. And then there's a little blue number next to it. And it says 15 plus, 20 plus, all 15 plus. That's how many employees you have to have for those laws to come into effect. So when we think about Title VII and the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, right? And all of a sudden you look at that and you say, oh, I don't have 15 employees. I don't have to follow that law. Jump down to the state law where it talks about Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act, and that's all employers, which basically covers the same thing. So it's important for you to have a basic understanding of what these laws are. And I'm just going to run through them very quickly. The Civil Rights Act is making sure that you're not discriminating based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin. This is where sexual harassment comes into play, this civil rights law. So you want to make sure that you have an understanding of that law, especially if you have 15 or more employees. The Age Discrimination in Employment Act is for 20 or more employees, but it is if a worker is over 40 years of age, they are actually protected. So if you take an employment action, you're going to discipline somebody, you're going to terminate somebody, you're going to do something like that, you want to make sure that you take into account, okay, we're terminating this individual. Maybe I have written some things up in documentation, maybe I haven't. But if you don't have anything written in documentation and that person is over 40, there's a chance that they could say that that was a wrongful termination. And you as the employer would have to prove that you didn't fire them because they're over 40. So make sure that you're following that law. Immigration status, the immigration status applies to all employers, and it's you're not allowed, obviously, to hire anyone who is not authorized to work in the United States. That's the bottom line. This is the I-9 form that you need to be filling out, I-9. And it's proving that that individual can work in the United States. For those of you who may not be familiar with that form and you have employees, you should be familiar with that form because they need to fill that information out. And then they need to give you documents proving that they can work in the United States as it's spelled out in that I-9 form. Now, the thing that employers can't do is you can't hire someone who is not authorized to work in the United States, but you also can't discriminate against workers based on their immigration status. So kind of a double-edged sword there. You want to make sure you're not hiring anybody who can't legally work in the United States, but you're also not discriminating against someone who may be from outside the United States who can legally work within the United States. And make sure that that individual isn't being discriminated against by you or any of your managers or any of their coworkers. So you want to be careful about that. Genetic Information Information Non-Discrimination Act, it's GINA is what it's called. And GINA is actually came to be when we started doing all the DNA tests and the ancestry.com and all of that stuff, and people started finding out about their genetic makeup. And suddenly they're finding that they have the propensity to maybe cancer or Alzheimer's or other diseases or those types of things. And so this genetic makeup suddenly became something that people started discriminating against because they didn't want to have somebody who had the cancer gene on their benefits plan. And so this Congress put this act together and rolled it out so that genetics or medical information of the worker or their family, including disclosures that aren't properly business related. So maybe I'm just having a conversation with somebody and I say, hey, I did this test, I found I had the cancer gene, right? That's just a personal conversation. Maybe somebody overheard that. You can't use any of that information to discriminate against anybody. So that's important to know there. The Americans with Disabilities Act is obviously you don't want to discriminate against someone because of an illness or a disability that they have. You want to work with them and you want to help them find a reasonable accommodation for that. And we're going to talk about that one a little bit further in a little more detail in just a few minutes. And then the last one, the National Labor Relations Act. This one, people look at that and they say, yeah, but that's for unions. I don't have a union. I don't have to worry about that. Well, actually you do. The National Labor Relations Act is legislation that covers all employers. And so it applies to working conditions. It applies to the opportunity for the employees to have conversations about their working conditions or their bosses and be able to have that conversation without fear of retaliation. So even if they don't belong to a union, they have the right to discuss their working conditions and their bosses, and they have the right to make sure that they can improve those working conditions. So, so that's something to keep in mind, that does apply to you, to all employers. That's a right that all employees have. And then the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act applies to all Colorado employers, and it prohibits discrimination and retaliation based on the civil rights that are outlined in the Civil Rights Act, age discrimination, ADA, plus sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and believe it or not, marital status to a coworker is protected in there. So you can't discriminate against that in Colorado. So let's just look at some of those things that
Courtney,
I mentioned.
There were just a few questions on that I wanted to address before we move on, if possible.
You bet.
One of them was a clarification. So for the laws that have a certain employee requirement number, if you have fewer than those employees, you don't need to include that in the handbook?
That's correct. These laws apply for those levels that I outlined.
Okay, but still a good idea to include, or? Still
a good idea to include, especially in Colorado because of the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act. So as I said, that applies to all employers, and it covers the civil rights areas, age discrimination, Americans with Disabilities Act, plus sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and being married to a coworker. So there's a lot covered there. So even though you may not the Civil Rights Act of 1964 may not apply, the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act does, which pulls those things into, I guess, into play, if you will. Sure. They're all of a sudden into play with the business that's smaller than 15 employees.
Okay, great, thank you. And then on the I-9 forms, should those be kept separate from an employee's folder?
They should be. You should. So this is what I did when I worked at the ambulance service. I actually had a binder. When I started there, we had 125 people, and when I left, we had about 300 or 350. And so I actually had binders that I put together, and I put them together by year. So I had a divider for each year, and then I knew when I needed to purge something, it was easy to do. It was easy to go and find that particular employee's I-9 information and purge it. Just along those lines, I-9s have to be kept a minimum of 3 years and 1 year after someone terminates. So if I work for you for 2 years, you have to keep it 1 more year, and that hits that 3-year minimum. And so then you can get rid of that information. if I work for you for 1 year and I terminate, you've got to keep my I-9 for 2 more years to hit that 3-year minimum. Okay. So yeah, don't keep that information in the employee file. And the reason that you do that typically is when they come in and they want to audit that information, they're going to ask for all of your I-9s, and they would take all your employee files at that point, if that's where they were. So what you want to do is have that in a separate file. So have all your employees I-9s together.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yep. Okay. We're ready to move on.
Yes.
All right, here we go. So we talked a little bit about these discrimination laws, you know, the race, the color, the religion, all of those things, if you'll notice, are listed. One of the things that I wanted to point out here, retaliation for engaging in protected activity. So in other words, if you're opposing a discriminatory practice or participating in employment discrimination proceeding, in other words, an investigation, for example, maybe a sexual harassment investigation. Let's use that. So if I'm in a sexual harassment investigation, you know, that's protected activity. You don't want to retaliate against me because I've done that. If I am talking to a coworker, if Hannah and I are coworkers and we're talking about our wages, you don't want to discriminate against that. That's actually protected in Colorado now under the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act. If we're talking about working conditions, you don't want to discriminate against that because that's protected activity, et cetera. And then also in Colorado, we have the Crown Act, which is Creating a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair Act. And that came into effect in 2020. And it protects against discrimination on the basis of one's race, including their hair texture, type, hairstyle, those types of things. So you cannot discriminate against someone based on their hair. So how would we discriminate against somebody? So we could discriminate against somebody in our hiring practices. Maybe you're looking at resumes and there's something on a resume or an application that gives you a hint that they are of a certain race or a certain age, or they're of a certain marital status or sexual orientation. And so you're looking at those and you're deciding, no, I'm not going to talk to those people that fall into that category. That's discriminatory. And that could be a wrongful hiring practice. So you don't want to do that. And then any employment actions. So what does that mean? Promotion, demotion, if you're writing somebody up, like a disciplinary action, shifts. Oh, I'm going to give Courtney this overnight shift, and I'm going to have her lift boxes all night. Well, I'm an over 40 female. I don't want to do that. Number one, I just don't want to do that, right? Number two, I may have some physical limitations that don't allow me to do that. And you're putting me into that situation because I'm an over 40 female because you want me to quit. And so that's a discriminatory practice. And so you want to make sure that you're not doing that. So work duty assignments, disciplinary, and termination. Let's talk about at will for a second. Colorado's an at-will state. So I should be able to terminate, I'll pick on Hannah. I should be able to terminate Hannah at any time, right? What does the NFL do? They trade people. I'm going to trade this person to another team. I'm going to cut them. I'm going to send them down to, to the baseball, they send them to the minor leagues or whatever. So the practice squad. I'm going to send them to the practice squad in football. You can't necessarily do that without a reason to do it, right? If I'm going to terminate, at will. If I'm going to terminate somebody, it would seem that I could do that. I could just automatically do it. Because at will means that I can fire somebody or they can quit at any time for any reason, with or without notice. That's what it means. I can fire them, they can quit for any time or at any time for any reason, with or without notice. That's at will. The problem is that if I do that, if Hannah terminates me, let's say, I can come back and say that was a wrongful termination, and she terminated me because I was an over 40 female. It's up to Hannah to prove that that wasn't true. Hannah's got to say, here's the documentation that Courtney was not doing her job. here are the times that I coached her. Here's when I wrote her up. Here's where I explained my expectations again and again and again, and she still did not change her behavior and she still didn't meet it. So I terminated her employment. It had nothing to do with her age or her gender. It was strictly her job performance. And that's why documentation is so important. And that's why I always say at will in quotes, because at will means, yeah, you can do that, terminate any time for any reason, with or without notice. But I still, as an employer, have to prove that I didn't terminate somebody based on a discriminatory decision. So great in theory, kind of harder in practice, as business owners have learned. Okay. Any questions on that?
I'm not seeing any in the chat right now. So
Okay.
anyone, if you do have questions, feel free to put them in there. But otherwise, I think we're good to keep going.
Okay, I'm gonna keep moving. So
can I mention anything? Can I verbally say something? So with the pay increase, you know, we've been challenged with pay everywhere, competitive pay, right?
Yeah.
And I have hired at levels that I'm paying my current employees, and it's like, how I don't even want them to talk about their pay, because I feel like if the people who've been there for a long time, how do you work around that?
That's really tough. Yeah, that's really tough.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, guide me.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm going to say I understand. That is very, very difficult. And I think when we look back to like when my grandpa started the furniture store, nobody talked about pay. And if you talked about pay, you got fired, right? I mean, back in the 40s, that's what happened. And so now it's protected conversation. So now if Hannah and I are talking about our pay, like we're not talking about other people's pay, we're talking about our pay, and we're sharing that information with each other, that's protected activity. And so you can't fire people for doing that. I totally understand how uncomfortable it might be if you've got a current employee and you're paying them $20 an hour, and you went out to try to find new employees and you would have normally brought them in maybe at 17 or 18, and yet you find that's not competitive and you've got to bring them at 20. And that's stretching you as a small business owner to bring somebody in, right? So you want to be careful that you don't tell them they can't talk about pay, and then you've also got to be careful with your salary bands and make sure that you're able to justify that pay, and you're paying people properly. And it's a struggle. There's not an easy fix for that. There's not an easy, here's the magic wand and this is how you fix that problem. It's got to be, you've got to do what you need to do to stay in business, and you've got to do what you need to do to get people. And sometimes that's paying people similarly to how you've got people on staff.
Yeah, it's tough, really tough.
It's extremely difficult, right? I have known some business owners that have had upfront conversations with their current staff. Those aren't always positively received, is what I'm going to say. And what I mean by upfront conversations is, hey, we're bringing people in, and the pay has gone up a little bit. It hasn't necessarily gone well for them, the majority of those conversations, but that is definitely an option, because the follow-up conversation after that person finds out that someone was hired at their wage doesn't go well either. So business owners are really stuck in this particular situation. Just real quick, I want to talk about two areas of discrimination that sometimes get missed. Disparate treatment is an intentional decision you make to discriminate against somebody, maybe their race, their color, their gender, their sexual orientation or gender identity, something like that. And so you're making a conscious decision to discriminate against them. All right. I'm not going to hire you. I'm not going to promote you. I'm going to give you this bad shift. That's a conscious decision. Disparate impact is more subtle, in that you maybe adopt a policy that you think is fine, but it turns out to have an adverse impact on a particular ethnic group or gender or sexual orientation, for example. So disparate treatment and disparate impact are things that you need to be aware of. Conscious and unconscious decisions, basically, is what I'm telling you to watch out for. When you make a policy decision, sit back and say, could this impact somebody in a protected category? Could this impact any of my employees? And what do I want to do about that? So have that global conversation, even outside of discrimination, have the global conversation of how is this policy going to impact my current staff, and walk through that. So compensation and overtime laws, the Fair Labor Standards Act is the law that we have got to follow there. And that establishes minimum wage. It establishes requirements and prohibiting oppressive child labor is really what the Fair Labor Standards Act does. So think minimum wage, overtime, child labor, that's what happens there. The safety laws that you need to be aware of. This is OSHA, right? This is Occupational Safety and Health Act, and the OSHA administration, or the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, oversees that act. So what does this mean? You know, when OSHA looks at your workplace, if they come in and they do an evaluation, and some of you have had that happen, some of you that might be a constant, you know, a constant thing that they might come in once a year or more often just to check out your workplace. They're really looking for, do you keep your work areas clean and orderly? Do you protect your stairwells or any openings in the floor, right? Are there free and unobstructed exits from all parts of the building so people can get out quickly if there's an emergency? Are there lighted signs, right? Do you have fire alarms and sprinklers? Do you have systems in place that people are going to be alerted to possibility of a fire so they can get out of the building? Do you have fire extinguishers? I mean, these types of things are what OSHA is going to look at, as well as your plans. Do you have a fire plan? Do you run fire drills? You know, what happens? What needs to go on here? So make sure that you're staying on top of those things as well. And as a small business owner, obviously, if you have remote workers and that's it, this isn't necessarily something that you're going to be that worried about. But if you have a brick and mortar store, you need to keep this in the forefront of your mind that your job as an employer is to provide a safe working environment. So you want to make sure that you're doing that. The other things that you need to be thinking about are any hazardous materials you might have. So if you're a printer, you might have hazardous materials in the shop. You want to make sure that you've got that figured out. Any PPE, the personal protective equipment that we've become so familiar with over the last couple of years, make sure that that's available as needed based on what that person's job is, or you know, if they want to wear a mask at work, it would be nice for you to provide that if you can. Bloodborne pathogens, that comes into play when somebody gets hurt. So you want to make sure that you know what you need to do if somebody gets cut or hurt at work. What do you need to do for the bloodborne pathogen issues? And then also think about ergonomics, especially with remote workers. How are their desks set up? Is their chair high enough? Give them some tips on how they need to set up that home workstation as well. And then any record keeping and reporting for OSHA, make sure that you're doing that. Workers' comp. So do you have a part-time employee? One, part-time employee, you need workers' comp. So workers' comp is not an option. You've got to have workers' comp and put that into place. Work with your benefits broker to find the right policy for you. While this is something that everybody knows about, sometimes it gets missed. And then also the other part of workers' comp that, you know, that can get missed is the actual steps you need to take if somebody gets hurt. So, you know, certainly you want to make sure that you're putting things in place. If somebody gets hurt, they need to notify you. And we're going to go through some of those steps a little bit later on in the program. Okay, we're going to step off laws for a minute, and we're going to get back into, you know, that day-to-day life inside your particular business by looking at the employee handbook. So this page has some general information, like, what am I thinking? Headings, you know, headings that you're going to be looking at to make sure that you're providing information to your employees. So these are common topics that are covered in an employee handbook. Each area has some policies under it. So benefits might be paid time off, the Colorado mandatory sick leave under the Healthy Families and Workplaces. I'm sorry, under under the Healthy Families and Workplaces Act. It could have, you know, if you provide insurance benefits, it would have that information in there. Maybe under the wage and hour policies, it's going to have what is a regular worker, what is a part-time worker, what is a non-exempt employee versus an exempt employee. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Those types of things. So you're going to have that information under there as well. If you have a policy that you don't follow, for example, maybe under your general policies, you have a dress code policy and you don't follow it, get it out of there. don't have it. Just eliminate it from the handbook, or send something out to tell everyone that the dress code policy is no longer something you follow, or update the dress code policy if that's what you need to do. But don't have a policy in your handbook that you don't follow, because then it gets really confusing for employees. They don't know which policies to follow or which not to follow. And yeah, go ahead. You bet.
It's about like discrimination.
Okay.
Like I've worked in places where sometimes it's the employees that are discriminating against other employees.
Yeah.
How would you handle something like that?
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? So an employee comes into your office and says, I feel that my coworker is discriminating against me or harassing me. That has to be looked into. And as business owners, that's a situation where you need to actually do an investigation and talk to the employee that came in to complain and say what happened. Tell me when it happened. Was anybody around? Can you give me more detail? So you're looking for the situation from their point of view, right? You want to find out what they are experiencing and get as many notes as you can. And then if they say, here are the witnesses that were there, you can talk to witnesses and then talk to the person who's being accused and find out their side of the story, and then make a determination on what could happen. As business owners, we are legally responsible for making sure that the workplace there's non-discrimination going on, and that it's harassment or hostile work environment free. And so in that situation, if somebody feels that they're being discriminated against, it really needs to be looked into very closely, and notes need to be taken. A file needs to be set up for that investigation. Questions need to be asked, and then a determination needs to be made as to what happens next. In some situations, it is those two workers need to be separated, and they can't work together anymore. In some situations, the person who was accused was obviously doing it on purpose and was trying to really, taunt the other person to create problems for them. And so in that situation, that might be a termination, where you're going to terminate that person. But you've got to go through that investigative process first to learn more and document. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, you bet. Okay, so if you don't have policies you don't follow, don't have policies you partially follow, don't have policies that you sometimes follow and sometimes don't. Those are the big takeaways for the handbook. Okay. So let's go into draft day. Let's go into that talent acquisition. What are we going to do? So when you're recruiting for people, and this is where we're finding some trouble now. We're finding trouble finding great talent to bring in to work for businesses across Colorado, across the United States. Really, there's a real concern about the talent pool and the jobs that are available, because they're not matching up all the time, and we're not able to find the right talent for the right jobs. So the first thing I want you to do is think about how you can become an employer of choice. And what do I mean by that? You right now are marketing your company, and in marketing that company, you're saying, okay, I'm going to be the best seller of this widget or of this service. And that's great. I want you to start thinking about, how can I be the best employer for employees that want to sell that widget or that service, or who want to build that widget, or, become a rep to help with that service, whatever that is. So start thinking about being an employer of choice, and then market for employees. Really market. So you want to actually reach out into the community. You want to let the community know you're looking for people. You can put it on Facebook. You can put it on any social media platform you want to, LinkedIn, whatever. You can go to schools and talk to their career centers. And if you do that, I would say, tell them you'll speak in a class, or you'll help them out on career day, or you'll do something to give back to the school, so you stand out from the other employers who are trying to get candidates from that school. Make sure that you're reaching out to them and you're having conversations with that career center to have them start throwing you the best candidates they see. And then one of the most important things that you can do with recruiting is really have clearly defined roles, responsibilities, and expectations for the job that you're hiring for, so that that person understands exactly what's going to be expected of them, and they say, yep, that's what I do best. I want to do that job. Okay. I feel like we could do a lot, Hannah, on that one slide right there. We could do like a whole hour on that.
Absolutely.
Interviewing. So you need to have some kind of screening process when you get the resumes. I usually sort them in yes, no, and maybe piles when I get my resumes. So I'm looking for, do they have the qualifications? Do they have experience? Do they have the, if I need certifications, do they have that kind of thing? So those people would go in a yes pile. People who don't have what I'm looking for, they're not meeting those minimum qualifications, are in a no pile. The maybe pile is, yeah, maybe, I might want to talk to them if the yes pile doesn't work out. So you want to have that type of screening process. Then I would do a 10-minute phone call with people and just say, hey, let me ask some questions. And so you're going to ask some screening questions to make sure you want to move forward with them in an interview process. Interviews, do's and don'ts. Let me just tell you, ask behavioral based questions. Ask, tell me a time when. Give me an example of. Describe a situation where. Those are the types of questions you ask. You're asking them for specific examples in their experience to see if those examples, to see if their experience really matches up with what you need. It also helps you know how they think. And so you can ask them those questions and learn a lot about the candidates for sure. And then make sure that you're documenting that interview. So you want to have notes from the interview. You want those notes to be objective. You want the notes to actually say this, maybe quotes of what they said, or to outline what experience they have, those types of things. And I usually put some kind of metric together with a score so that when people are being hired, and maybe I hire a 25-year-old male, but not a 50-year-old female, then in those situations, I want to be able to say, yeah, but the 25-year-old male scored a 95 on my interview process, and the 50-year-old male scored a 30. And here's the sheets to show that. So again, that's just helping with making sure that you're not getting any kind of wrongful hiring practice discrimination going on.
Had a
And then
question.
yeah, go ahead.
So you can't ask them can you verbally ask them what they expect for pay, or can you not ask them that?
You cannot ask about their salary history. So this is the question that I would ask. I would say, the pay range for this job is this to this. I want to make sure that you're aware of that, and then that's okay with you.
Okay, great.
Right. So I wouldn't ask them if, what they're looking for, what their past history is, because that can get discriminatory, because women historically have been paid less. And so they're going to tell you, oh yeah, I got paid $60,000 and it could be an $80,000 job. Right. So you want to make sure that you're just telling them what that range is. In Colorado, we now have to put that range on our job ads. You've got to put the range of pay, and you've got to put the summary of benefits on the job ads. So that's available too. It's kind of a good salary survey little tool for you to look at to see how other people are paying for those positions. Onboarding, I said this to somebody the other day, and they said, that totally makes sense. I said, I want you to think about a guest coming to your home, and that guest is going to spend the weekend, and they're going to come in, and you're going to welcome them. You're going to make sure they know where the glasses are and where the water is and where the refrigerator is. And you're going to make sure that they know where they're going to sleep and where the bathroom is and where all the tools are that they can use, and how to turn on the TV and how to hook up with Wi-Fi. And you're going to give them all the tools and all the comforts of home when they're in your home. You want to do the same kind of thing when your new employee comes in. You want them to have all the tools. You want them to feel welcome. You want them to have everything that they might need. Now, obviously, there's a training period, and that's fine, but just be thinking about, how am I going to get that person to feel comfortable at home? We wouldn't invite a guest into our home and have the door locked, or once we invite them in, say, hey, we're going out, so good luck. Just find stuff, good luck to you. We'll let us know when we get back if you have any problems, or call us. You wouldn't do that with a guest. What you want to do is you want that guest to feel at home. So do the same thing with your employees. You want to welcome them home. Make sure that you've got the training mapped out, that the trainer is ready to go. And then logistically, don't sit the new employee at the desk where everything went to die. Like the keyboard doesn't work, it's sticky, the monitor has a blip in it, all the old pins that don't have any ink in them are sitting there. You want them to be feeling welcome, and they get good equipment, and pins that are full, and maybe some logoed material around the desk to make them feel at home. Salary caps is what they call it in the NFL. I'm just going to talk a little bit about compensation here. So let's talk about exempt versus non-exempt. This is pretty self-explanatory when you look at it. Exempt is typically hourly. They're typically paid an hour. Non-exempt is typically hourly. They're paid by the hour, and they are eligible for overtime if they work over 12 hours in a day, or over 12 consecutive hours. If their shift starts at 10 p.m. and they go till 11 the next morning, that's 12 consecutive hours, actually 13, or 40 in a week. That's when overtime kicks in. So over 12 hours in a day and 40 in a week, and that gets paid at 1.5 times of regular pay. Even if you have a policy that says you can't work overtime without my approval, if they work overtime, you still have to pay them for the overtime, but you can write them up for breaking the policy. So you must pay them if they work for overtime. Salaried is an exempt employee. They're exempt from overtime. Typically, there are qualifications. Well, there are qualifications that people have to fall into in order to be an exempt categoried employee. And so those are listed there, and you can find out more information on that just by Googling non-exempt versus exempt, and that's going to help you. Minimum wage, I've got 2022 up. We probably are all familiar with that, but I've also got the new 2023 levels up. So the minimum salary level is going to $50,000. That means that if somebody is not making $50,000 in your business right now, you have to, and they're getting paid salary, you've got to either increase them to $50,000 a year, or you've got to now pay them on an hourly basis rather than on a salaried basis. There are 3 things that go into that exempt category: salary basis, which is paid by the week, not by the hour. Okay. Salary level, which is what I'm just talking about here, going from 45 to 50, and then job duties. And the job duties fall into those categories that were on the last slide. All right. Okay. Here we go. I feel like I'm in a 2-minute warning already, Hannah. Okay, here we go. We're gonna go into injured reserve quickly. And what do I mean by that? I'm talking about protected leave laws that we have. So the Family Medical Leave Act is for employers with over 50 employees. Okay, that's the Federal Family and Medical Leave Act. Colorado is coming out with something that starts in January of 2023 called the Family and Medical Leave Insurance. That particular piece of legislation, what you're going to have to do as an employer next year is collect premiums for that insurance, for that act, and then the employees can start taking paid time off starting in January of 2024. This short period of time that we're together, we're not able to talk about that in any detail, really. So if you don't know about family and medical leave insurance in Colorado, be sure to get information on that from your payroll provider, or from your attorney, or from your HR consultant, or whomever you work with on those types of matters. Make sure that you've got that. Okay. The Americans with Disabilities Act, again, that's 20 plus people. And so make sure that you're following that. CADA comes into play there. The Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act has the Americans with Disabilities Act in it as well. And then these others: Pregnancy Discrimination Act, jury duty leave, voting leave, military leave, the Healthy Families and Workplaces Act for paid sick leave in Colorado, volunteer firefighter leave. Those are all mandatory protected leave. So if people are out for those reasons, then you cannot penalize them for being out for those reasons. All right.
Another question on that for the,
Yep.
Is there a limit on the family and medical leave insurance for 2023 for employers? Is it for so many employees or less, or so many employees or more?
Oh, that is a great question, and it's escaping my mind right now. Can you believe it?
Oh, yeah. And I see Hannah put the link there. So I guess
Did you? Thank you. Can you look up, Hannah? I'm so sorry. Could you just check that for me? I think I know it's 0.9% of the gross paycheck.
Okay.
And the way the legislation is written is 0.45 for the employer and 0.45 for the employee, as far as the premium goes. And so I know that that's part of it. And I don't know why I'm just sitting here thinking 5 employees is but it may not be. And so Hannah, can you double check that for me as far as if there's a number of employees for family?
Because
you're
yeah,
sitting
I'm
there
sorry, just
managing
to
everything else.
clarify the question. Yeah, I can definitely, I have it up and we'll look at that. The question is if there's, I'm sorry, can you say the question again, Rachel?
Oh, just that, is there a minimum for, as an employer, that you have to offer that?
like a minimum number of employees?
Yes, correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes, I will
Right,
check
is-
on that,
thank
and we'll
you.
let you know. And then there was another question about new requirements to offer retirement.
The Colorado Secure Savings Plan. So one of the things that I don't do in my practice is benefits. That's something that I don't do. And what I would say is that look that up because there's the legislation and process, I guess the process is still being developed for that. It is a situation where if employers offer the right kind of retirement plan in their business already, then they can be exempt from the Colorado Secure Savings Plan. But I don't know that they've come out with the right definition of how you can get exempt from the Colorado Secure Savings Plan. So I think we're kind of flying the plane as we're building it. And so I would expect a lot of information to be coming out on the Colorado Secure Savings Plan very, very soon. What you should be doing is looking at, I know that they have deadlines as far as when you can opt out and what that's going to be looking like for family. But for Colorado Secure Savings Plan, I would look that up and I would set a Google alert is what I would do, a Google alert for Colorado Secure Savings Plan. And then anything written about it will show up in your inbox. I do that for Colorado employment law. I do that for a variety of things. So be sure and check that out.
Just to follow up on that minimum benefit or minimum requirement for employees, it's 9 or fewer. You do not need to
9.
contribute to the program, but you do need to like through deductions remit, sorry, I'm still reading it, remit the employee share, which is 0.45%. You can do that through your payroll deduction, but you as an employer do not need to contribute if you have 9 or fewer employees.
9. Thank you. I had 5 in my brain. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, the Family and Medical Leave Act, these are for employees with 50 or more employees. I'm going to kind of skip over this just a little bit. If somebody needs to know more information about that, you guys can email me. We can talk about that. But this is actually an act that only comes into play if you have 50 or more employees and they meet certain qualifications. So I'm going to move on. The Americans with Disabilities Act, this is a situation where if somebody is disabled or somebody has a long-term health issue or needs to have an accommodation of some sort. So for example, perhaps you have a technician, an EMT that works in the ER, and that EMT has a hearing deficit, and so they need a special stethoscope in order to hear blood pressures and lung sounds and your heart. And so the company can afford it, so they buy that special stethoscope for that EMT. That's an accommodation for that EMT. So those types of work tools or maybe accommodations in some way of longer breaks or maybe a different type of work schedule, those types of things. What you have to do is go into a really an interactive process with the employee to find out more about what they need and then gather that facts and determine if that's reasonable for your business, and then have a conversation with the employee about, yes, it's reasonable and these are the things that we're going to do, and then follow up with them and make sure everything's going okay. Or, no, I'm sorry, that's not reasonable. It's going to cost us, $25,000 to do that. And we're a small business and we just don't have that kind of, unfortunately, we can't accommodate that. And then make documentation note of the fact that you looked at it, you did everything you were supposed to do, but you realized that due to the high cost of what the employee was asking for, you couldn't do it at that time. So just document it. Just real quick on workers' compensation, we already looked at the definition earlier. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you've got the workers' compensation posters, all your employment posters actually posted. If you have remote workers, there are remote posters that you can get access to. So you want to just maybe Google remote employment posters and you'll find the companies that are enabling you to do that. Make sure that you've got the right posters up, make sure the employees understand what they need to do for workers' comp, make sure you understand what you need to do for workers' comp, and then follow those rules by the letter if somebody gets hurt. You want to find out about it right away. The employee should not be the one making the determination as to whether or not they need to go see a doctor. So yeah, I really banged my hand and it's cut and it's bleeding and it really hurts, but I'll be fine. I'd probably send them to a physician to have that checked out. So you as the employer get to make that decision. Okay, let's go through the game plan pretty quick. This is just what you need to do for performance management. So be thinking about performance management. What you want to do is you want to make sure you're setting goals and expectations. You want to make sure you're coaching that employee through those goals and expectations so that they know what they're doing. You're correcting that course. You're talking to them a lot. You're holding meetings with them, either huddles, just real quick, brief meetings in the morning to find out what they're doing that day and to see if anything went wrong yesterday that you need to talk about. And so have those quick huddles, stand-up huddles, maybe 5 minutes, under 15 minutes for sure, but have that conversation. Then have one-on-one meetings to talk to them about what they're doing in their job, what their priorities are, what their goals are, how their development's going, those types of things. So all of that is part of coaching. When you set those expectations, you want to make sure you're holding them accountable. And so you're going to have an accountability piece where you're going to talk to them and say, okay, we set out these goals. Where are we? We set out these expectations. Hey, you were supposed to get that project to me last Friday. I haven't seen it yet. What's going on? How can I help you? What's delaying that? Have those conversations. And then progressive discipline is just one of those things where you do it at a progressive level. So maybe a verbal warning and then a written, and then maybe an awareness counseling and then a verbal warning. So kind of, hey, I noticed you were late today. Are you okay? Is awareness counseling. Okay, you've been late several days. This is a verbal warning. We're going to go to written if that needs to happen, if you don't correct your behavior, and then go to written, and maybe you have 2 or 3 written warnings with a final written being the third. And then you terminate. That's progressive. It progressively gets more serious, right? That's what we're talking about there, is just that progressive discipline. So be sure to set up some things within your organization, no matter how many employees you have, that you get that done. Okay. And you work through that problem, and you make sure that you're talking to them about that. And then all documentation, make sure that you're being objective in your documentation, make sure that you're documenting conversations with your employees, and especially if they're corrective ones or developmental ones, you want to make sure that you're keeping track of all of those as well. And with that documentation, you want to make sure that that's secured, so not everybody has access to it. I always tell people the rule of 2 locks. So you want to have it locked either behind a locked door in a locked file cabinet if you have paper copies, or in your computer, that your computer has a password protection, and then the file that information is in is password protected as well. 2 locks, and that'll help you with documentation. One last word on documentation is just, I want you to envision it on a gigantic screen in a courtroom. So you want to put objective comments. You want to make sure that you're having conversations about objective, or writing notes about objective things and not subjective things. And you want to make sure that you can back that up. Sometimes that's with emails. Sometimes that's with, written warnings, those types of things. So just make sure that you've got all that information saved. Wow. Okay. I did it. That was a lot of information, but honestly, I didn't want to pare it down any further, because those are really, really important things that you should know as a small business owner in HR. Now, I know that I've worked with North Metro. Wow, Hannah, quite a bit. I don't know when I started working with you. I know I worked as a North Metro client in 2007. And you helped me set up my business. And so then in I don't know, a few years after that, I started volunteering and doing some training and doing some consulting with North Metro, and haven't really ever looked back. But I know that throughout the year, I typically throw up some, or we go through some HR presentations. And so I would love to hear if there are other presentations that you would like to see from the North Metro group on HR, and we can get those topics going, just to make sure that you've got the information that you want as participants in today's webinar. So thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you to the Economic Development Council for having me as well. I'm honored to be here, and it was a wonderful tour for the hour that we were together. So thank you.
Yes,
great job. Thank you. But Courtney, so do you do this kind of work on the side? Is that what your business is, HR work? for small businesses?
Yes, I am an HR consultant and I work with businesses. So I work sometimes with business owners, sometimes with HR managers. Sometimes I do some management coaching just on how to deal with employee problems, those types of things. That's what Courtside does.
Okay, because I know with small businesses, I don't necessarily have anybody that I work with directly with HR. It's me, myself, and I.
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
tough.
wearing multiple hats, and I don't have time for that sometimes. And is that
Yeah.
something you do, or?
Yeah, yes. Yes, it is. But I would be remiss without saying that you can get free consulting through the SBDC. And so, be sure to check there because there are a lot of fantastic consultants that can help you with some of these situations very, very well.
Great. Thank you for your time today. I appreciate your information.
Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, yeah, thank you so much, Courtney. That was really helpful. And I put some of those links that Courtney was mentioning into the chat.
Thank you.
You can schedule follow-up appointments through the SBDC with Courtney or with any of our other SBDC consultants. I put both those links in there. I put the website for the Brighton Economic Development Corporation. You can check out some great things there, as well as our North Metro SBDC website. And then later today, I will follow up with the email that has the slides and the recording. And my email. So if you do think of ideas of topics that would be helpful for you, please respond to my email or drop it in the chat right now. As Courtney mentioned, that is really helpful for us to know what you need. Otherwise, we're just making these things up.
Hannah,
True.
I think that one upcoming thing I've heard a lot of business owners talk about is the retirement coming up in 2023. So that might be, and it sounds like from what you're saying, Courtney, they're still on the fly trying to figure that whole process out and how that's going to roll. So I'd be interested. I mean, we are in November. I'm just curious how this is going to roll out into 2023. I mean,
Yeah, no, I agree. And as I mentioned, benefits is something that I've got benefit partners that I always refer to. It's not something that I necessarily keep up on all the benefits law that's going on, and this falls into that category. But yeah, the last article I read, which was I think 2 weeks ago, it said, "Oh, we're still developing the process." I thought, okay, we'll see how this goes. So I think as I said, they're building the plane as they're flying it a little bit here.
Yes, yeah, thank you for that, Courtney.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I see a question about the recording. I will take that email down in case it's different. You will all receive the recording and materials at whatever email you signed up for this with, unless you tell me differently. So thank you all so much. I know we are at the hour. We want to be respectful of all of your time, but thank you for joining, and thank you so much, Courtney. We always love your presentations.
Well, thank you so much. A little dry content today, but that's all right. Go Broncos. We'll just end with that. All right.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you,
care.
everyone. Wish you a good afternoon.